He had blue eyes, wavy brown hair, and skin so fair he could have walked into any room in America and been taken for a white man. So why did this man sit in a makeup chair and let a studio painting darken his own face? Why did a performer who could have vanished into the easy, well-paid world of white Hollywood instead insist, again and again, that he belonged to the people the cameras had forgotten? The man in that chair called himself Herb Jeffries, but that was not the name on his birth certificate. He was born under a name almost nobody today can spell, in a year he himself could never keep straight, to a father he never once met. For nearly 100 years, he told the story of who he was, and the story kept changing. Irish, Sicilian, Ethiopian, Creole, Portuguese, 3/8 Negro. A chameleon, he liked to say, smiling, whenever a reporter tried to pin him down. Today we are going to follow this impossible man across a century. From a Detroit rooming house to a movie ranch in the California desert. From Duke Ellington's bandstand to a jazz club in Paris. And along the way, we will answer 3 questions. What was his real name? Why did a light-skinned man choose, in the middle of Jim Crow America, to be seen as black? And when he finally died at the age of 100, what did he mean when he said the most famous thing he ever created was a person named Herb Jeffries? Let us count up, from number 1 to number 10. Number 1, the boy with no name he could keep. He was born in Detroit on the 24th of September, in a house his Irish mother ran as a rooming house, taking in boarders to keep her children fed. The birth name was Umberto Alexander Valentino, though even that appears in the records as Umberto Alejandro Valentino and Valentino, and half a dozen other spellings depending on which document you trust. And the year? That is the first mystery this man left us. He told Life magazine he was born in 1914. He told other people 1911. Late in life, while a film crew was making a documentary about him, he claimed he had finally dug up his birth certificate and settled on 1913. When he died, the newspapers split the difference and simply called him 100 years old, or so. The confusion was not an accident. As a teenager, chasing work, he lied about his age so many times that he genuinely lost track of the truth. His father, a musician, was gone before Herb could form a memory of him. The 1920 census tells its own quiet story. It lists the 6-year-old boy as mulatto and names his father as a black man, Howard Jeffrey. Decades later, Herb would insist that Howard was only his stepfather and that his real father was a Sicilian named Domenico Valentino who died in the First World War. Which version is true? We may never know. What we do know is that a fatherless boy in a Detroit rooming house learned to ride horses on his grandfather's farm up in Port Huron, and that when the Wall Street crash of 1929 gutted the city, he dropped out of high school and went looking for a way to eat. So how does a broke, mixed-race kid from a Detroit ghetto talk his way onto a professional bandstand? Number 2, the lie on a cocktail napkin. One night around 1933, in a smoky little Detroit nightclub, a teenage Herb Jeffries was singing when the greatest trumpet player alive walked through the door. Louis Armstrong listened. Then Armstrong pulled a cocktail napkin off the table, scribbled a few words on it, and handed the kid a passport to a bigger life. The note said, in effect, "You want to hear this boy's voice." Herb hitchhiked to Chicago and used that napkin to get an audition with bandleader Erskine Tate at the Savoy. But there was a problem, and it is the problem that would define his entire life. Tate fronted an all-black band. The club owner looked at this pale, blue-eyed, wavy-haired young man and asked him point-blank what he was. And in a split second that would echo for 80 years, Herb Jeffries made a choice. Knowing Armstrong was from New Orleans, he said he was a Creole from Louisiana. He got the job 3 nights a week at 19 years old. Think about what that decision really was. Most light-skinned black performers of that era were doing the exact opposite, quietly passing for white to unlock the bigger stages and bigger money reserved for white artists. Herb Jeffries ran the other way. He darkened his story, and later his skin, to be more black, not less. Years later, he explained it plainly. As the critic Gary Giddens recalled him saying in the New York Times, "I just knew that my life would be more interesting as a black guy. If I'd chosen to live my life passing as white, I'd have never been able to sing with Duke Ellington." His break came fast. At the 1933 Chicago World's Fair, he sang with the Earl Fatha Hines Orchestra on national radio broadcasts live from the Grand Terrace Café, and by 1934 he was making his first records. But it was on the road with that band that he saw something he could never forget. What did a young singer see in the Jim Crow South that changed the movies forever? Number 3, the crying boy who built a legend. Touring the Deep South with Earl Hines meant learning exactly where a black band was allowed to exist. They played tobacco warehouses. They played black-only movie houses. And outside those movie houses, Herb Jeffries watched something that stopped him cold. Little black boys lined up around the block, week after week, to worship Tom Mix and Gene Autry and Roy Rogers up on the screen. Cowboys who never, ever looked like them. Then, by his own account in a 1997 interview with American Visions magazine, he came upon a small boy crying because the other children in a make-believe cowboy game wouldn't let him play cowboy. The reason cut to the bone. There were no black cowboys in the pictures, so the child could not be one even in a game. It was a lie the movies had told, and Herb knew it in his bones. As he pointed out, in the real American West, roughly 1 in 4 cowboys had been black, a figure historians at the Smithsonian have since confirmed. That truth had simply been erased from the screen. Standing there, Herb Jeffries made himself a promise. He would give that crying boy a hero. He would make a Western with a black singing cowboy in the white hat. The good guy, the one who gets the girl, the one who wins. There was only one problem. It was the 1930s. No such film had ever been made with sound, and no one in Hollywood was lining up to pay for it. Every studio door he pushed on stayed shut. So, how does a jazz singer with no money and no studio behind him actually get a movie made? Number 4, selling a cowboy no one would finance. He became a salesman. For months, Herb Jeffries knocked on doors, pitching an idea that most producers thought was commercial suicide, an all-black cast singing Western. He finally found his yes in a veteran B-movie producer named Jed Buell, a man sharp enough to see a market everyone else ignored, the hundreds of black theaters across the country hungry for their own heroes. Buell agreed. And then came the twist that makes this story almost too strange to believe. Buell looked at his leading man and decided Herb was not black enough. This pale, blue-eyed singer, Buell worried, would not read as a black hero to a black audience. So the makeup crew was brought in to darken Herb Jeffries' skin, and he wore a big white Stetson pulled low to hide his naturally light brown hair. Let that sink in. In a nation obsessed with light-skinned black performers passing up into whiteness, here was a man being painted down so that black children could finally see themselves as the hero. The result was Harlem on the Prairie, released on the 9th of December, 1937, promoted as the first all-black cast singing Western in the sound era. It was shot in about 5 days at the Walker Movie Ranch out in Newhall and on the ranches of the high desert, on a budget listed at $50,000, and it earned that entire sum back in its first 12 months. It even got a write-up in Time magazine. The crying boy finally had his cowboy. But one hit does not make a legend. Could Herb Jeffries turn a single film into a genuine star? Number 5. The Bronze Buckaroo Rides. He could, and he did. Over 1938 and 1939, Herb Jeffries made 3 more westerns. Two Gunman from Harlem, Harlem Rides the Range, and the film that gave him his nickname forever, The Bronze Buckaroo. In them, he played a character named Bob Blake, a smooth, brave, honorable cowboy who rode a horse named Stardust, sang his own songs, and did all his own stunts. His backup group, the Four Tones, rode with him, and the great comic actor Manton Moreland supplied the laughs. These were race pictures, made cheap and fast for a segregated America, and they played mostly in the roughly 500 black theaters scattered across the country, though a few even reached white audiences on the coasts. And here is what made them radical. Because everyone in the cast was black, there was no shuffling, no bowing, no servant roles, none of the demeaning nonsense Hollywood forced on black actors everywhere else. In Bob Blake's world, black people were the heroes, the villains, the lovers, and the fools, the full range of human beings. Herb sang his theme, "I'm a Happy Cowboy," and audiences ate it up. He and the Four Tones began touring the country in a Cadillac mounted with actual steer horns on the hood, and children mobbed him at every stop. He had become, as fans called him, the Bronze Buckaroo, Black America's answer to Gene Autry. But a bigger stage was already calling his name, and it belonged to the most sophisticated man in American music. What happens when a cowboy hangs up his spurs to sing for a duke? Number 6. Flamingo, and the voice that sold millions. In 1940, Duke Ellington heard that baritone and made Herb an offer. Herb walked away from the movie saddle and became the featured male vocalist of the Duke Ellington Orchestra, the most celebrated band in jazz. Then came the song that would outlive them all. On the 28th of December, 1940, Herb Jeffries stepped up to the microphone and recorded Flamingo for Victor Records, draped in a lush, revolutionary arrangement by Billy Strayhorn. It was Strayhorn who had coached him to drop his voice from a bright tenor down into that dark, velvet, honeyed baritone that became his signature. The sound that earned him the nickname the Bronze Buckaroo all over again in the world of jazz. The record label executives were unimpressed and sat on the record. They finally released it in 1941, and not long after, Herb left the band for military service in the Second World War, entertaining troops. And then, Flamingo exploded. Now, here is a genuine dispute worth naming. The New York Times and other careful sources put its sales at more than 14 million copies, while record labels and many obituaries have claimed the song sold over 50 million. Either way, it made Herb Jeffries a national star and one of the defining voices of the big band era. But fame in 1940s America came with a poison-tipped offer for a light-skinned black man. What would Herb do when Hollywood tried to make him white? Number 7. The offers he turned down. This is the chapter that reveals the man's spine. As the Bronze Buckaroo, Herb Jeffries had proven he could ride, sing, act, and draw a crowd. And white Hollywood noticed. The cowboy star Buck Jones was so impressed that he floated a plan: send Herb to South America to learn Spanish, give him a brand new name and a brand new Latin identity, and bring him back to star in a series of westerns for white audiences. It was a golden ticket. All Herb had to do was erase who he was. He turned it down flat. He said, in essence, that he was what he was, and nothing could change that. He also refused the standard offers from the major studios, because for a black actor, those meant servile, stereotyped background roles, and he would not play them. And then there was the night, in 1941, during Ellington's daring all-black revue, Jump for Joy, at Los Angeles' Mayan Theater. An investor suggested Herb was too light to share the stage with the darker-skinned Dorothy Dandridge, and a makeup artist blackened him up. When Duke Ellington saw his handsome singer painted dark, he was mortified. He stormed into the dressing room, demanded to know what had happened, and moments later the word came down: no more dark makeup, ever. The irony of Herb Jeffries' whole life was standing right there in that mirror. A black man painted white by one crowd, painted darker by another, and never once allowed to just be himself. But by the early 1950s, tired of the American color line, Herb did something few stars would dare. He left. Where does a man go when his own country cannot decide what he is? Number 8. The country he had to leave to be whole. So he did what almost no American star of his fame would dare. In the early 1950s, Herb Jeffries packed up and moved to France. And the moment he stepped off the boat, he felt the difference in his own body. In America, he had headlined theaters he was not allowed to sleep in. He had sung to packed rooms in cities where he could not sit at the lunch counter the next morning. In Paris, none of that existed. He could walk into any restaurant on any boulevard and simply sit down. He was not the light one or the dark one or 3/8 anything. He was Monsieur Jeffries, the American with the golden baritone, and that was enough. He opened his own jazz club and named it the Flamingo, after the song that had made him, and night after night he stood on his own stage in a city that judged him by nothing but his voice. For a man who had spent 30 years being sordid, measured, and painted by other people's rules, France was the first place that ever let him just be a singer. And here is the quiet, remarkable thing. He came back anyway. In 1957, Hollywood lured him home to star opposite a young Angie Dickinson in the film Calypso Joe, and he chose to return to the very country that had never once known what to do with him, because it was his. He rebuilt a life in Los Angeles, turning up on television westerns like The Virginian, and later on shows like I Dream of Jeannie and Hawaii Five-0, a familiar face to a new generation that had no idea it was watching the first black singing cowboy. He had proven he could walk away from America. He had also proven he did not have to, but the loudest scandal of his life was still ahead of him, and it would land on a woman brave enough to marry him in the full glare of the American press. Who was willing to burn down her own career to become Mrs. Herb Jeffries? Number 9. 5 wives, 1 scandal, and a search for God. Herb Jeffries married 5 times, and every one of his wives was a white woman. And on marriage license after marriage license, this self-described 3/8 Negro listed his own race as white, sending reporters and record keepers into fits of confusion. His first marriage, in 1947, was to a former Rose Parade princess named Betty Allensworth, in a ceremony held down in Tijuana to slip around America's anti-miscegenation laws. But the marriage that made headlines came in 1959, when Herb wed the flame-haired burlesque superstar Tempest Storm. She was one of the most famous strippers in America, and she paid a brutal price for loving him. When the studios learned a white Georgia woman had married a black man, they blacklisted her. MGM's plans for her evaporated, and her contracts vanished. They had a daughter, Patricia, before divorcing in 1967. Through all of it, Herb was chasing something far deeper than fame or romance. He was a devoted spiritual seeker who became a personal friend and student of the yoga master Paramahansa Yogananda, sitting with the guru near the end of the master's life in 1952. He read philosophy, he meditated, and he believed, as his longtime collaborator put it, in one world and one people. By the 1970s, though, the Bronze Buckaroo had largely faded from the public eye, playing small rooms while the world moved on. Was the man who gave black children their first cowboy hero going to be forgotten? Number 10. The 100-Year Ride Home. No. In his final decades, America finally came looking for Herb Jeffries. In 1995, at the age of 81, that baritone still rich and warm, he walked into a Nashville studio and recorded a whole new album of Western songs, The Bronze Buckaroo, Rides Again, for Warner Western. In 1997, he was inducted into the Western Music Association Hall of Fame. In 1998, he received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame and a Golden Palm Star in Palm Springs. In 2004 came the honor that meant the most: induction into the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City. The singing cowboy finally standing beside the very icons he had once watched black children being turned away from. He sang for a president at the White House. He kept performing at a little cafe in Idlewild, California, well into his 90s, and the great jazz pianist Herbie Hancock had been named after him by parents who loved his voice. In 2007, a documentary crew helped him assemble his life story in a film called A Colored Life, and it was during that project that he pointed to a birth certificate and, one last time, tried to settle the question of who he really was. On the 25th of May, 2014, Herb Jeffries died of heart failure at West Hills Hospital in Los Angeles. He was 100 years old, or so. He was survived by his 5th wife, Savannah, and 5 children. He had outlived Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, and every other singing cowboy, the last of them riding off exactly the way he came in, on his own terms. So who was he, really? Here is the answer he gave us, and it is better than any census could ever be. Remember the 3 questions from the start of this ride. His real name was Umberto Valentino, born in a Detroit rooming house to an Irish mother and a father he never met. A name he traded for one that was itself an accident, because a record label misspelled Jeffrey as Jeffries, and he simply kept the mistake. He chose to be seen as black, painting his own face darker in an age when everyone expected him to run the other way, because a crying boy who could not be a cowboy deserved a hero, and Herb Jeffries decided to become him. And as for who he truly was beneath all the shifting stories, he told an interviewer the simplest, truest thing about the handsome cowboy the whole world thought it knew. "I invented him," he said. He also liked to grin and tell people, "I'm colored. I'm just not the color you think I am." That was never confusion. That was a free man refusing to let anyone else hold the pen. Herb Jeffries spent 100 years being exactly and only what he decided to be, and he handed millions of forgotten children a hero in a white hat while he was at it. If this story moved you, do one thing for a man who spent his life making sure the overlooked were finally seen. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe, so these forgotten legends keep writing.